and die not except in the state of Islam. In today's khutbah, we'll be sharing 3 stories that are surrounding one central principle in our deen. As we have mentioned before, one of the most striking surahs that many of us recite. For most of us, we have probably 20 surahs, mostly from Juz Amma, that are like our regular surahs, right? Like Qul Huwa Allahu Ahad, Surah Falaq, Surah Nas. Then maybe we have a longer surah once in a while. But one of these surahs is Surah Ma'un. And I'll share, this is another story, I wasn't going to mention this, but I'll share very briefly. I was once in Indiana where I grew up, and we had a visiting scholar. His name is Sheikh Faisal Matadar. He was at the time living in Jordan. He's now actually in Virginia. He moved to the DMV area. But he's a wonderful young scholar from Jordan, originally from America, but studying in Jordan. And he came to visit us, and I was praying it with him, and I had the opportunity of studying with him for a month. And as he was praying next to me, the Imam was reciting a very quick recitation of a Juz Amma surah. And I remember it was Surah Adiyat. And it was very fast. Like it was like that. And even though we've been told to recite with tartil, to recite with beautiful recitation. And the Prophet ﷺ says, someone is not amongst us if they don't recite and they add tartil to the recitation, beauty to the recitation. But anyways, this person was reciting very fast. But even though he was reciting in that state, I noticed that Sheikh Faisal, who was next to me, he had something like this on, and he was holding it like this underneath his arm, if you can see my hand, and he was squeezing his hand. But I only noticed because I was praying next to him. And so I see him squeezing his shirt as he's praying, and he's deeply affected. And just to give you an idea of this person, he grew up in the United States. He came from a very wealthy family. He went to a prep school, and then he just decided that he wanted to connect to Arabic. And he comes from a Kashmiri background. His family didn't know Arabic. He started studying Arabic at George Washington University as a freshman. By his senior year, he was actually teaching Arabic at George Washington University, while still in undergrad. That's how connected he became to Arabic. So he has this deep, he went to Jordan to study at the renowned Quranic Arabic Institute, Qasid. He applied for the program and they made him the director of the program. That's a true story. He's the only person who's ever done the entrance exam and not missed a single answer. So when I got there 2 years later, he was the director of the program he had applied to 2 years before. So anyways, just to give you an idea. So he has a deep connection to Arabic and the Quran. And so while he was hearing Surah Ma'un, he is squeezing his shirt. And after the prayer, I turned to him, I said, Sheikh Faisal, what was that? And he said nothing. He was trying to push it aside. I said, no, please tell me what it was. And he said that, sometimes people take these surahs in the Quran that they seem really simple and short, and they recite them quickly, not realizing that these last surahs in the Quran are the most weighty surahs. An example, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and he was talking about Surah Adiyat. In his example, I'm going to give a different example, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about the stampeding horses. And he was saying it was like he could feel the hooves, and he could feel these horses beating against the ground because of the way it was being recited. It was like he could feel the dabha. He was like that connected. Similarly, Surah Ma'un, which will be the beginning point of this khutbah, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, أَرَأَيْتَ الَّذِي يُكَذِّبُ بِالدِّينِ. Have you seen the person who has rejected the deen? And I know we've talked about this surah in a different context before, but it's actually very stunning. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is starting the surah with a question. And I want you to imagine we are not in Bethesda. Imagine we are with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We are in his presence. The surah has just been revealed. And you hear from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's lips verses he has just received from Angel Jibreel. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is reciting, أَرَأَيْتَ الَّذِي يُكَذِّبُ بِالدِّينِ. Have you seen the one who's rejected the deen? There's 3 meanings of this. Have you seen the one that's rejected Islam? That's heavy. Have you seen the one that's rejected the Day of Judgment? That's heavy. Yawm ad-Din. Or the one who has rejected the dain to Allah, their debt to Allah, which is also heavy. فَذَلِكَ الَّذِي يَدُعُّ الْيَتِيمَ وَلَا يَحُدُّ عَلَىٰ طَعَامِ الْمِسْكِينِ. The sign of someone who has rejected Islam. It is not mentioned in the beginning, anything to do with their worship, even though that is a way you could reject Islam. There were people after the Prophet ﷺ passed away that stopped paying zakat after the Prophet died. They said, we're not going to pay zakat anymore. Those people were considered apostates. They had left Islam. That's a true story. Companions left Islam because they stopped paying zakat. That is true. But here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't mention that they stopped praying, they stopped fasting, they stopped paying zakat. They said, oh, Hajj is no longer part of Islam. They left Islam. They rejected Islam, not left. They rejected Islam because they stopped taking care of orphans and people in need. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, and when they pray, they're lazy and they show off in their prayer. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this is such a stunning verse, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَوَيْلٌ لِلْمُصَلِّينَ. Woe to the ones who are worshipping. But when they worship, they're lazy. When they worship, they're showing off. I'm mentioning that because this insight from Surah Ma'un connects to a beautiful, beautiful story, one of my favorite stories. And if you've heard any of this before, inshallah, it's a reminder for you. Imam Ghazali is considered one of the greatest scholars of Islam. If you say top 10 scholars of Islam that are well known, Imam Ghazali, Imam al-Jawzi, Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah, Ibn Taymiyyah. This is a group. And these are like the very well-known ones that people quote a lot. Imam Ghazali is one of them. Imam Ghazali was known for writing probably the most well-read books after the Quran and Hadith. The Ihya Ulumuddin. Right? It's up there in the most read books in Muslim tradition. Yet, the moment that changed his life was not the moments that he was writing the books. It is the moment that he paused and he did not write. It is said of Imam Ghazali that one time he was in one of these sessions where he was writing. And to imagine that this person wrote over 80 to 90 volumes of books on Islam. And every page of it you could study for a week. So you can imagine how eloquent, how inspired he was by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how blessed his writing was and his knowledge. He is writing one of these books, and he said that as he was writing, a fly came and landed on the tip of his pen. The fly came and landed on the tip of his pen. Remember, we're connecting to this verse that we began with, that the one who rejects Allah in the Day of Judgment is the one who does not take care of others. There is this sensitivity and this care that a believer has to have in their heart. So he's writing and he sees a fly land on the tip of his pen and he begins to drink from the pen. And I mentioned this in the last khutbah that I just shared in Virginia. I don't want anyone to be alarmed. When I heard this as a kid, my first question was, he let the fly drink from the tip? Wouldn't it poison the fly? So no flies were hurt in the story. I want to show. Back then the ink was organic, it was fine. You could drink from the ink. Okay. There was no poison like today. Okay. That was a question I had. Maybe you didn't have that question, but it's been resolved now. So he's drinking from the tip, and Ghazali has this thought come into his heart. He says that, how thirsty must this fly be that he is so desperate for a sip that he is even drinking from the tip of a pen. He's not even afraid of me. He's coming and drinking. And so he had mercy on this fly. And he made the intention that for as long as this fly was drinking from the tip of the pen, he would not move the pen to continue writing. And then after 2 or 3 seconds, the fly went away and he continued writing. Ghazali may or may not have thought of that as significant. But there is a story that one of his students, and this is something because it has to do with dreams, you don't have to build your aqidah based on your belief. But I believe it because the scholars who mention it are righteous people. That one of his students was a great scholar, and he saw his teacher in a dream. And he said, Ya Imam Ghazali, what is your condition? What is your state? What is your affair? And Ghazali said that my Lord had mercy on me. And then he said, for what reason did your Lord have mercy? And he says, it was not for any of the things I did that people knew about. It was for that day that the fly drank from the tip of my pen. When I showed a moment of mercy, my Lord was generous and He overlooked my sins. Now the question is, do we live a life, do we live in a world where people still care about that fly on the tip of the pen? How many times are we driving, and I was talking to my wife about this, we talk about this regularly actually, that for thousands of years, human beings were part of nature. And now our lives are so unnatural that we build homes upon the land of animals. And then when other people do that to us, we call them colonizers. And I don't want to speak about politics here, but if a certain government steals the land of innocent people abroad, we have rallies against them. That's good. We should. I understand that. But if we do that for the entire animal kingdom, we call the victims roadkill. We just run them over, and then they're a nuisance. We have to avoid them on the road. Now, could it be that in our time, it is not more important to rush to the masjid for a big event, but to pause next to the road, to have empathy on that animal that was struck because we built a road on top of their home, and to take care of that animal, to even bury that animal if there's no harm to us because of bacteria. This is a deen of care. And I want to share two more stories of how this is exemplified. One from the life of the Prophet ﷺ, and then one from someone I knew very dear to me. The Prophet ﷺ in Makkah was the most well-respected man in the city. And I know we've heard this, but I want us to understand, to be someone that is so respected that even when he came with the message, his enemies who were saying he is a liar, who is saying he's a magician, na'udhu billah, who is saying he's a poet, who's making up the Quran, they actually were saying this publicly, but privately they were trusting him. To the extent that when the Prophet ﷺ made the journey from Makkah to Medina, when he made the hijrah, one of the last things he had to do in Makkah before he could make the journey is he had someone that worked for him, because he couldn't do it himself, otherwise people would know that he was making that journey and they would know he's leaving. He had to make sure that all the possessions that the Qurayshis who were fighting him, torturing his companions, trying to assassinate him himself, they had left their wealth and their precious items with him when they were leaving Makkah for a trip. He was still being trusted by his enemies while they were slandering him. When he received the message, and his blessed wife Khadija radiallahu anha took him to her cousin Waraqa bin Nawfal, who is actually the first man to believe in the Prophet ﷺ. He's not considered officially because he died soon after, and he didn't have a chance to do the formal shahada because that had not been taught yet. So Abu Bakr is considered the first man. But he said, I believe in you, Waraqa. And then he said, I wish I was old enough. I wish I had enough life that I could fight with you. He said, because your people will expel you from the city. And he also said, the one who came to you, the angel, is the same angel who came to Musa alayhi salam. The Prophet ﷺ heard these two stunning statements from Waraqa, but the part that he responded to is not that, oh wait, I'm a prophet? I'm like Musa alayhi salam? I was sent angel Jibreel? His question after he heard those two important pieces of information, the day he received revelation, he said to Waraqa, he said, my people will expel me? That's the part he was stunned by. He had such a beautiful reputation in Makkah. The idea that the people who loved him most would one day turn on him was unimaginable. One of these people that turned on the Prophet ﷺ, she was a woman of Makkah who had moved to Makkah but had never met the Prophet. She had only heard rumors from his enemies, from the Quraysh that were enemies of the Prophet. She was an older woman. And when she heard that there was a man named Muhammad, of course she would not say Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, in Makkah, and she heard that he was tearing families apart and he was questioning the idols and the gods of the past, she was so upset by this, she said, I'm leaving town. Sometimes we say that in this country, right? If so-and-so wins an election, we're moving to Canada. Some of us have said that, I think. She had the same mentality. She's like, I am leaving Makkah. I don't want to be in the same city as that man, Muhammad. We would say, of course, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam sees an old woman leaving. Once again, what's the topic of this khutbah? Having empathy. Like we see in Surah Ma'un, like we see with Imam Ghazali, with the fly on the tip of his pen. Like we should have when we see those blessed animals on the side of the road that we have colonized. So anyways, the Prophet ﷺ sees an old woman and she's walking on the street and she's carrying all of her possessions and she has one animal, riding animal, and she has the animal filled with her possessions. And they're walking. And the Prophet ﷺ goes to her and she doesn't recognize him. And he says to her that, can I help you? And she says, of course, thank you, young man. What a noble young man. And they start walking. And my friend Dawood Wornsby, he has a beautiful song called Don't Talk to Me About Muhammad. That's a nasheed that's on this story. Anyways, so they're walking out and they get to the edge of Makkah. And he helped her, he got her where she needs to go, and now she's traveling with a caravan. The Prophet ﷺ, she turns and leaves. And this is really important. What does he do? He also turns and leaves to go back to Makkah. This is actually the most significant part of the story for me. It wasn't like a got you. It wasn't like, oh, by the way, you know that person you... And the whole way she was on her way out of Makkah, she was cursing the Prophet ﷺ, not knowing it's him. She was saying, this man has ruined our city, this and that. And he's just listening. And he's helping her. Why is it significant that he doesn't bring it up? What it means is, if she had not turned around like she does turn around, and she says, by the way, you didn't tell me your name, young man. Then he turns back to her and says, I am Muhammad ibn Abdullah. She returns to Makkah as a companion. She's one of the first 100 companions of the Prophet ﷺ. I'm saying this because if she had not turned and asked his name, he would have gone back to Makkah. It wasn't like oh, by the way, you know the people you've been talking bad about, I'm one of them, I'm their leader, and here's a pamphlet on Islam. It wasn't. It was care for care's sake. It was love because you have a sensitive heart. It was Ghazali with the fly times 100 because of the Prophet ﷺ. It's empathy. It's not mechanical Islam. It's emotional Islam. We care. If someone's here at this khutbah, doesn't matter where you come from, doesn't matter who you are. It's not formal Islam. Where, Assalamu alaikum brother, Jummah Barak, Assalamu alaikum. I don't care about you, I don't know where you're coming from. Someone says, how are you? Kayf al-hal. Kayf al-hal does not mean what's up. And then you'd say, Alhamdulillah, how are you? Alhamdulillah. Now we've exchanged dhikr, but we still don't know how each other are doing. That's not Islam. Islam was, Kayf al-hal, tell me your state. The reason you're asking it is because you want to make dua for the person. You want to fulfill their need. Their needs are your needs. It is an obligation. Assalamu alaikum is not a greeting, it's a dua. Assalamu alaikum should not be done like this, it should be done like this. Assalamu alaikum means, may Allah's peace be over you. Or the other meaning is, Assalam alaikum, may Allah always be over you, taking care of you. That's one of His names. As-salam alaykum. Wa alaykum salam is returning that dua. This is a deen of sensitivity. We are told in the Quran, what Allah looks for on the Day of Judgment is qalbun salim, a sound heart. We have to care. And in this country, after this time period of the Age of Enlightenment, which had some enlightenment, some endarkenment that happened during that time, there was this obsession with rationality. Feeling became not important. Schools became places you get headaches, but your heart is never activated. You're not studying calculus and tearing up because it's so beautiful, unless you happen to love derivatives. I was a bit of a nerd, I can attach. But that's not what's for. School is for. There was a debate in Germany about does teaching mean to instruct or to inspire? Guess which one won out? To instruct. Instructors, not inspirers. But this is a deen where the heart and the mind have to be in balance. We have to care. You know the word pathos means feeling, right? So it's interesting, when you put an A in front of a word, it means to negate it. So apathy is someone without feeling, apathetic. So if apathetic means without feeling, take the A out. What's the word? Pathetic. Pathetic was the word that was used for someone who felt too much. They're so pathetic. It was seen as negative. Feeling was seen as negative. It had two meanings. One, I feel for you, so pathetic, but it also meant someone was pathetic. They were not apathetic, they were too feeling. This is a deen of feeling. So the Prophet ﷺ took her all the way on her journey, and he was ready to leave, and she may still think negatively of him. But he knew Allah was in control. And so Allah turned her heart. Even before her heart came to Islam, her heart turned to the Prophet to find his name. And then as soon as she heard who he was, she had heard so much about the Prophet. Listen to this. Everything she had heard about the Prophet was counteracted without the Prophet saying a single word. She heard words from the enemies. She saw practice from the person. If we were true believers, we wouldn't even have to talk and America would come to Islam. We would just have to be. Believers. If we were being this belief, then our actions would be more eloquent than our speech. And the final story I want to share about this idea of having sensitive, caring hearts. Once again, going back to Surah Ma'un. Back to Imam Ghazali saying he was forgiven, not for the thousands of pages of books he wrote, that are some of the best books you'll ever read, but for the moment that he did not write, and he had mercy for a fly. And then, of course, our blessed Prophet's example with the story of the old woman, the last story. And some of you have heard this, inshallah. I'm sharing it because this is, in my life, you can speak about things you have seen from others and heard from others, but this is the one that I experienced myself, and it changed my life. So I want to share it again, inshallah. In 2007, I was flying back from Lahore with my mother, and I remember that flight because during that flight we had really bad turbulence. And it was actually like our plane dropped. Like it felt like 100 feet. It was like people were really, really shaken up by it. And I remember we arrived to O'Hare Airport, and I opened up my phone, and my phone just had maybe 40, 50 text messages, and they all said urgent, call. So I knew something had happened. So I called one of them. It was my friend Taysir. And we had just graduated from college together. And he said that, did you know what happened? Did you hear what happened to Fatima? Fatima had graduated with us. She was in my class, and she was like the most caring girl. She was always in the masjid. She was always preferring other people to herself. And we found out that she had just gotten to Harvard Law. She had deferred to do Peace Corps. She was just this wonderful young lady. Just always giving, so much goodness in her life. And he said that she passed away. She was in a car crash. What had happened was she was visiting a friend. She had arrived to Akron Airport in Ohio, and it was raining. And she said, it's raining so bad, I'll get a cab. And her mom had said, no, I want to get you. And her dad said, you stay, it's raining, I'll get her. And they both died on the way home. And the last thing she told, I was giving this khutbah in McLean just an hour ago, and one of the brothers who was in that khutbah, I knew he was from her community. I didn't know that he knew them. He's also a doctor who knew them in their community. He came to me after, he said, I don't know if you know, but she was actually on the phone with her mother when the accident happened. And she actually saw it, and I'm only saying this because this is the state she was in. She said, Mother, I'm going to die now. We're dying now. She knew because it was a truck. Anyways, I'm saying this because of what happened next. And I didn't check if there's younger. Okay. There's some younger people here, so this is the lesson of the story is what happened next. So I get a call from their family, and they tell me to be at this address if I can right away. I just flown in, and without even going back home, we just drove straight to Ohio. And I made it there just in time for the funeral prayer. It was that same day. And they actually were buried in the same plot because they're father and daughter. And I saw something something I'll never forget from that moment. And one of the things, actually later in the day, I saw that the people that had filled up her home were her neighbors. And it made me think about what kind of connection I have to my neighbors. The Prophet ﷺ said that you are personally responsible for the needs of your 40 closest neighbors. Right? Some people have said that's 40 people. Some people have said that's 40 homes, which is something really to think about. That if their needs are not being fulfilled, you may be falling under أَرَيْتَ الَّذِي يُكَذِّبُ بِالدِّينِ. That you don't take the care. How can you take the care of the needs of people if we don't even know them? And some people may say, well, in these areas, everyone has money, there's not the same needs. No, what if someone, one, there are people struggling, but two, what if someone has an emotional need? What if someone has loneliness? What if someone's going through anxiety, grief? That's not our responsibility. I'll tell you one quick thing, and I know we're almost out of time. There was a brother I know in Allentown, we lived together. He went to a neighbor's house and he happened to knock on his door and he said, I haven't ever checked on this neighbor. He's like 80 years old or something. Let me check in on him. This is a true story. He checked in on him around Thanksgiving time. And this old man didn't have anyone to eat Thanksgiving with. So he actually went to his house and they ate together. This is a true story. The next morning that man passed away in his Allentown, Pennsylvania neighborhood. So anyways, going back to the story, we get to the graveyard, and an undertaker, the guy who works in the graveyard, he comes. And any stereotype that you may have, this guy does not like Muslims. If you have that stereotype. The tattoos he had, the politics he probably followed, the look, everything. You would think this guy would have no connection to this group. He came up to us, and I'm saying that would be a stereotype, that would be a generalization. He came up to us, and he immediately said, I heard there's a Muslim funeral today. We'll be doing it. And he said, just have Dr. Khimji speak to me and we'll arrange for it. I found out that Dr. Khimji, who had passed away, had been taking care of the funerals of everyone in the community. So he said, just let me talk to Dr. Khimji, we'll work it out. And the brother next to me, he said, I'm sorry, but today is actually Dr. Khimji's funeral. And I saw the guy who was working at that, he was like a 30-year-old, his face just dropped. We did the funeral, we did the janazah, and then they filled up the dirt on the grave. And then everyone started to leave. And they say that the person in the grave actually hears the footsteps of their loved ones leaving, and they realize that they're alone. But as everyone was leaving, this man went to his pickup truck. I can still see him. He had an American flag bandana and a white cut shirt. And I can still imagine him. He goes to the pickup truck, he grabs an American flag, and he put it on Dr. Khimji's side of the grave. And then he left. I thought maybe that was something they do for all the graves, and I noticed no one else had an American flag on their grave. So I went up to that gentleman, right now I can't remember his name, and I asked him, I said, why did you do that? I don't see American flags on anyone else's graves. And he said, his eyes started filling up with tears. And he says, that right there is a true American. I said, why? And then he pulled me aside, and I had never noticed this, but he opened his mouth, and he had all these wires in his mouth. He had really extreme dental work being done. I found out later that when we call him Dr. Khimji, he was actually a dentist. He was that type of a Dr. Khimji. And he said that this man has been taking care of me and my family for the last 3 years for free, because we couldn't afford dental care. Imagine what it means to have so much care. And he never did it to say, if I do this, then they'll become Muslim. You do it out of goodness, and then you know Allah is a turner of hearts. What kind of life have you lived? That when you leave this world, your goodness has even touched the person who's going to bury you.